Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into one of the most intense geopolitical standoffs unfolding right now in Northern Europe, where the Baltic Sea has become the center of a growing crisis. Denmark has reportedly blocked the passage of Russian naval forces, and this move has sent shockwaves across NATO, the European Union, and the Kremlin. This is not just a maritime dispute, it's a strategic confrontation that could reshape military dynamics in the Baltic region and possibly escalate tensions to a whole new level. To understand why this is such a big deal, we need to look at the geography and importance of the Baltic Sea. It is a narrow, heavily controlled body of water bordered by NATO members such as Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Poland, Germany, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Almost the entire Baltic coastline now belongs to NATO countries after Finland joined in 2023 and Sweden joined in 2024. This leaves Russia with only a small stretch of coastline near St. Petersburg and the heavily militarized exclave of Kaliningrad. For Russia, access through the Danish Straits, specifically the Öresund, Great Belt and Little Belt, is essential for its navy to move between the Baltic Sea and the North Sea, then into the Atlantic Ocean. These straits are legally considered international waters, but they are controlled by Denmark, which has the authority to enforce certain regulations and security restrictions. Recently, Russia attempted to move several of its warships and auxiliary vessels through these straits, claiming it was a routine naval operation. But Denmark reportedly denied passage, citing security concerns, increased military activity, and possible violations of maritime rules. This was not a casual decision. Blocking Russian naval access is one of the strongest signals Denmark, and by extension NATO, could send without direct military engagement. This move angered Moscow immediately. The Kremlin accused Denmark of violating international law and warned of serious consequences. Russian media began portraying the incident as NATO aggression, while military analysts in Russia called for retaliation, possibly by deploying more forces to the Baltic region or even increasing nuclear readiness near Kaliningrad. But Denmark is not acting alone. Behind the scenes, NATO intelligence believes Russia may be preparing something larger, perhaps testing NATO's response, conducting electronic warfare, or even planning sabotage operations similar to the Nord Stream pipeline explosions in 2022, which many Western experts suspect were linked to Russia. With rising tensions in Ukraine and the Arctic, NATO countries cannot risk giving Russia free access to strategic sea routes. Denmark's move signals a firm stance. No more unchecked Russian naval movement in NATO-controlled waters. At the same time, the Baltic Sea is becoming the most militarized maritime zone in Europe. Sweden and Finland, once neutral, are now full NATO members and have some of the most advanced navies in the region. Poland is rapidly expanding its coastal defense systems and missile capabilities. The United States frequently deploys warships and surveillance assets to monitor Russian movements. Even small Baltic nations like Lithuania and Estonia are upgrading radar, communication, and anti-submarine systems. With all these forces packed into such a small area, even a minor incident has the potential to spiral into a much bigger conflict. Russia, on the other hand, is facing a massive strategic disadvantage in the Baltic. Its Baltic fleet, based in Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg, is cut off and vulnerable. If Denmark and NATO decide to fully restrict Russian naval movement, Russia's ships would be stuck. This means Russia would lose the ability to project power into the Atlantic, support operations in the Mediterranean, or reinforce its fleet in the Arctic. So, the Kremlin sees Denmark's actions not just as an inconvenience, but as a direct threat to its military capability and global influence. But here's where things get even more interesting. Denmark's decision is likely coordinated with NATO. NATO is preparing for its largest military exercises in decades, simulating a response to a potential Russian attack in the Baltic region. These drills involve tens of thousands of troops, warships, submarines, fighter jets, and cyber defense teams. The message is clear. NATO is ready to defend every inch of its territory, including the sea lanes. If Russia is planning to test NATO, NATO is more prepared than ever to respond. Russia knows it cannot defeat NATO in a conventional naval war in the Baltic. So instead, it may turn to hybrid tactics, cyber attacks on Danish infrastructure, GPS jamming of aircraft and ships, disinformation campaigns to divide European countries, or covert operations near critical undersea cables and energy pipelines. In fact, Baltic nations have already reported suspicious Russian vessels near telecommunications lines and power links under the sea. Denmark's intelligence services have warned that Russia is actively mapping critical infrastructure in the region and might be preparing to sabotage or disrupt it in the future. This is why Denmark cannot afford to let Russian warships pass without strict control and surveillance. It's not just about ships, it's about what those ships might be carrying or supporting. Another key player in this crisis is Germany. As the largest economy in Europe and a major NATO member, Germany relies on Baltic Sea trade routes for energy, goods, and economic security. If tensions escalate, shipping lanes could be disrupted, and that would deeply affect German industry and the entire European economy. That's why Germany has announced plans to expand its naval presence and work closely with Denmark, Sweden, and Poland to monitor the region. There are also discussions about creating a permanent NATO naval task force in the Baltic Sea. This would be a direct response to Russia's growing aggression. Meanwhile, Russia is strengthening Kaliningrad into a fortress. It has deployed advanced anti-ship missiles, S-400 air defense systems, and potentially even nuclear-capable Iskander missiles there. From Kaliningrad, Russia can threaten NATO ships, aircraft, and bases across the region. But here's the reality. Kaliningrad is surrounded. If a conflict ever breaks out, it could be isolated and cut off quickly. So both sides are escalating their defenses, but they are also trapped in a dangerous strategic balance where any mistake could ignite a wider conflict. The United States is also heavily involved. American spy planes, drones, and surveillance ships are constantly patrolling the Baltic Sea. The U.S. has already supported Denmark's decision and warned Russia not to provoke NATO forces. Washington sees the Baltic Sea as a front line in the broader struggle against Russian aggression, similar to the Black Sea and the Arctic. The U.S. has also deployed long-range missile systems to Europe, which could target Russian naval bases if necessary. This is no longer just a regional issue, it's part of a global power struggle between NATO and Russia. Looking ahead, what happens next depends on how far each side is willing to go. Denmark blocking Russia is a bold step. If NATO stands firmly behind Denmark, Russia may be forced to back down legally or diplomatically. But if Russia decides to push through the straits without permission, it could trigger a direct confrontation. Denmark could respond with patrol ships, fighter jets, or even physical blockades. One miscalculation, one warning shot, or one collision could spark an international incident. On the other hand, Russia may retaliate indirectly by increasing pressure in the Arctic, the Black Sea, or even in cyberspace. It may try to divide NATO by negotiating secretly with countries that depend on Russia for energy or trade. But after what happened in Ukraine, most European nations no longer trust Russia's intentions. They are more united than ever, and this unity is exactly what makes the Baltic Sea so strategically important. In the end, this crisis is not just about ships passing through a narrow channel. It is about who controls Europe's security architecture. It is about whether international law still matters when great powers clash. It is about freedom of navigation, territorial sovereignty, and the balance of power between NATO and Russia. Denmark may be a small country, but its decision has massive consequences. The Baltic Sea has become the new geopolitical hotspot, and every move from now on will determine whether peace holds or conflict erupts. The world is watching closely, and this story is far from over.